There are moments in history that don't announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive quietly in private rooms, in hushed conversations between people who have carried the weight of crowns their entire lives. And when those moments finally surface, they have the power to stop everything, the politics, the protocol, the years of silence, and remind an entire family that time is running out. This is one of those moments. For years, the British royal family has been defined as much by what it doesn't say as by what it does. Smiles at balconies, stiff upper lips at funerals, a century's worth of tradition that teaches every member of the Windsor line to hold their feelings behind locked palace doors and let the institution speak instead of the person. But in the middle of everything, the cancer diagnosis, the estrangements, the public battles, one woman stepped forward and said enough. Not to the press, not to a television camera, but directly to her brother and then in the most personal terms to the sons who had long since stopped speaking to each other. That woman was Princess Anne. She is 74 years old. She has spent more than 5 decades in public service without a scandal, without a memoir, without a tell-all interview. She is the hardest-working royal in the family, completing more public engagements last year than any other working member of the firm, including the king himself. She does not seek attention. She does not explain herself. She simply works and shows up and gets on with it. In many ways, she is the backbone of a family that has spent the last several years fracturing at the seams. But even Princess Anne has a breaking point. It started with King Charles's cancer diagnosis. In February 2024, the palace announced that the king had been diagnosed with cancer, a form discovered during a procedure for an enlarged prostate. The news was received by the public with a kind of stunned sadness. Charles had only been king for a little over a year. He had waited his entire life for the throne, and now, barely settled into the role, he was fighting an illness that nobody could fully predict. Buckingham Palace kept the specific type of cancer private, but what became clear almost immediately was the seriousness of what lay ahead. The king began treatment. His schedule was reorganized. Prince William quietly began taking on more duties. And Princess Anne, who has always been the one to sit beside her brother when things get hard, found herself having conversations she had never expected to have this soon. According to sources who spoke to Woman's Day, the news of Charles's cancer diagnosis forced Anne to confront something she had tried not to think about. The reality that time was no longer something any of them could take for granted. The two siblings, always close in their own private and understated way, began having what sources described as serious discussions about the king's final wishes. Not about crowns or estates or the formal transfer of royal duties. About family. About his sons. About the one thing Charles wanted more than almost anything else, but had not been able to achieve: an end to the feud between William and Harry. The rift between the brothers is by now well documented. It began quietly, built slowly, and then exploded into the open in a series of interviews, documentaries, and a memoir that shook the monarchy to its foundations. Harry's book, Spare, published in 2023, was a direct and deeply personal account of everything he felt had gone wrong with the institution, with his brother, with the people around them. It was the kind of book that made reconciliation seem not just difficult, but almost impossible. The damage it did was not just to relationships. It changed the way the public thought about every person named inside it. William, who had already been pulling away from Harry since the years before Spare, went completely silent after the book landed. There were no public acknowledgments, no visible attempts at connection. By 2026, reports confirmed that Harry and William had not spoken to each other in a very long time, not since before the Netflix documentary, not since before much of the public fallout that followed Megxit. They existed in the same family, but in entirely different worlds. One was the heir, preparing for a future as king. The other was across an ocean, building a life in California, fighting legal battles in British courts over security arrangements, and occasionally speaking to journalists about a father who had stopped calling him back. King Charles, caught in the middle, found himself unable to fix what had broken between his sons. A source close to the king told OK magazine that Charles had reached a point where he no longer viewed the estrangement as simply a family disagreement. He saw it as a source of genuine personal sadness, one that deepened every time another year passed without any meaningful progress. The king was acutely aware that time was moving, and that each month of silence between William and Harry made the gap harder to bridge. He feared that if something didn't change, the fracture would become permanent, not just in their lifetimes, but in the institution they were both supposed to serve. But the king, for all his concern, was also limited. He was a man managing a cancer diagnosis, managing a kingdom, managing the optics of a monarchy that couldn't afford to look weak or fractured. He could not simply sit his sons down and demand they make peace. The politics within the family were as complex as any he faced as a head of state. William had his own deep feelings, his own sense of betrayal, his own reasons for the distance. Harry had his own wounds, his own grievances, his own conviction that he had been wronged in ways that were never fully acknowledged. So King Charles did something he had rarely done in his life. He leaned on his sister. According to sources, Anne and Charles began having private, extended conversations about what the king truly wanted, not just for the monarchy, but for his family. What emerged from those conversations was not complicated. It was the wish of a father who knew he was unwell, who had spent years watching his sons drift further apart, and who wanted desperately to see them in the same room again, not out of duty, but because they were brothers, and because families are supposed to find their way back to each other. The wish was simple, the execution was not. Princess Anne, to her credit, did not promise what she could not deliver, but she listened, and she carried what she heard with the same quiet determination she brings to every other challenge in her life. People close to both siblings described her as urging the king to pursue this wish, even if it meant accepting that a full reconciliation might not happen in his lifetime. Her argument in essence was this: the attempt itself matters. The gesture of reaching across the silence matters. Even if William and Harry cannot sit together and feel easy, the fact that their father made clear what he wanted, in plain terms, before it was too late, would mean something to both of them in years to come. What happened next is where the story becomes something that neither William nor Harry had fully prepared for. Anne, after those long conversations with her brother, began to speak, not in the way the royal family usually speaks, through press offices and carefully worded statements, but in the directness that has always defined her. She spoke to people who spoke to other people. She let it be known, in terms that could not be misunderstood, what Charles's final wish actually was: that his sons find their way back to each other. That the feud, the years of silence, the legal battles, the public accusations, end before a funeral became the only occasion that brought them back together. When the weight of that revelation reached William and Harry separately, the effect was described as stunning. For William, a man who has spent years carefully building walls around his feelings about Harry, the news that his father had expressed this as a final wish was not easy to dismiss. William is a future king, but he is also a son. And sons, regardless of what they carry publicly, are not immune to the reality of a dying father's voice. The wish did not automatically dissolve the distance, but it landed differently than any public plea or tabloid story ever could. It came from the person both brothers had always orbited, the father who was now ill, who was now reduced in ways that none of them wanted to admit, who was now asking for something personal and irreversible. Harry, for his part, had been speaking publicly about his own desire to reconcile for over a year by the time this revelation reached him. In a BBC interview in May 2025, he had said, plainly and without drama, that he would love to reconcile with his family. He had said there was no point in continuing to fight. He had said that life was precious. He had said, in a sentence that carried more weight than almost anything else he had spoken publicly, that he did not know how much longer his father had. These were not the words of a man who had given up on family. They were the words of a man who had run out of patience with the distance and was afraid the window was closing. When the content of Charles's final wish reached Harry, the same wish Anne had been quietly carrying out of those private conversations, it confirmed what he had already feared but not wanted to speak aloud. His father was not just unwell. His father was thinking in terms of last wishes. His father was thinking about what he would leave behind and what he needed to put right before he left it. Neither William nor Harry spoke publicly about the revelation. That is consistent with who they are, two men who have both, in different ways, learned to hold enormous things in private while showing a controlled face to the world. But people who know both of them describe the impact as profound. A quiet shift, a softening at the edges of a wall that had been built brick by brick over years of hurt and misunderstanding. What Anne had done was something that no intermediary, no palace aide, and no round of legal discussions had managed to accomplish. She had made the feud between the brothers real in a new way, not as a royal scandal, not as a media narrative, but as something happening to their father. She had put a human face on the cost of the silence. She had made clear that the most powerful man in her family was spending some of his diminishing energy wishing that his sons could find their way back to each other, and that this wish deserved to be honored, or at the very least, acknowledged. In July 2026, something happened that many people had long believed was no longer possible. Harry came back to the UK, and after appearing at the Invictus Games 1 year ago event, he traveled to Highgrove House, King Charles's private residence in Gloucestershire. He came with Meghan and their 2 children, Archie and Lilibet. It was the first time Charles had seen his grandchildren since the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. The visit was private. No cameras. No statements issued in real time. Just a family sitting together in a house that had once been full of all of them, trying to find their way back to something that years of distance had made fragile. It was not the full reconciliation the king had wished for. William was not there. The relationship between the brothers remains complicated and unresolved in ways that a single visit cannot undo. But it was movement, real, visible human movement, in the direction Charles had always wanted. And Princess Anne, who had said nothing publicly, who had made no speeches and given no interviews, had quietly made it possible. Her role in this story is not the kind that gets celebrated in the conventional sense. It does not come with applause or breaking news alerts. It is the role of someone who understands that families break in private, and sometimes the only way to help them heal is to work in private too. She had sat with her brother in his most vulnerable moments and listened to what he truly wanted. She had taken that wish seriously when it might have been easier to set it aside. And she had done what people who love their families sometimes have to do. She had carried a heavy truth from one room to another and trusted that it would land somewhere important. King Charles continued to receive treatment through 2025 and into 2026. In December 2025, he made a public address in which he shared that his cancer treatment would be reduced in the coming year. An optimistic development that the palace confirmed was the result of early diagnosis, effective intervention, and a commitment to following medical guidance. He expressed hope that his experience might offer encouragement to others facing similar diagnoses, framing his own battle not as a private royal matter, but as something shared by millions of people who face the same fear. He is, by all accounts, still reading his red boxes every morning, still attending engagements when his health allows, still a man who believes that service is not optional. But he is also a father who made a wish. And in that wish was everything about who he is beyond the title, a man who has spent decades navigating an institution that often demands you sacrifice the personal for the public, and who found, at the end, that what he wanted most was not a legacy carved in stone, but 2 of the people he loves most standing in the same room without bitterness between them. Princess Anne carried that wish across the silence. Whether it is fully answered or not, the fact that she spoke it aloud, that she made sure both William and Harry understood what their father was asking for, while he was still here to ask, is a quiet act of courage that will shape how this family remembers this particular chapter of its history. Some revelations change everything in a single moment. Others work more slowly, like water finding its way through stone. This was the second kind, and it came not from a palace press office or a royal biographer, but from the Princess Royal herself, a woman who has spent 74 years of her life in service to something larger than herself, and who chose, in the middle of one of her family's most painful seasons, to serve something even more personal. The truth of what a father wanted before time ran out.